So again, my name is Carol Wilmot, and welcome to this one-hour webinar titled, What is Special About Special Education for Students Who are Deaf and Hard of Hearing? The presenters today are myself, Carol Wilmot, and Sherry Conrad. TA Live is provided to you once a month by Resource Materials and Technology Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. RMTC offers professional development, on-site observations, consultations, training, and technical assistance, as well as offers a free loan library. We will send it to you for free and provide you the envelope to mail back the materials to us for free. RMTC also provides evaluations and assessments, information and referrals, and tons of resources. All services and materials available from RMTC are provided at no charge. This is the team of people who make up RMTC-DHH. All of us work together collaboratively to support your needs, no matter what part of the state you are in. I am Carol Wilmot, the Deaf and Education and Transition Coordinator. Sherry Conrad, who you'll be hearing from soon, is a Technology and Training Specialist. Mark Keith is the Training Coordinator for Parents and Families. Carmelina Hollingsworth is the Director for the RMTC project. Laura McDonald is the Administrative Assistant for RMTC. If you call our 1-800 number, you will be welcomed by Laura. Ezra is the Media and Technology Specialist, providing website development, implementation of learning management systems, and online trainings and technical support for RMTC. If you would like to contact any of us, you can find our contact information on the website. I'm going to take a minute here to check because we have one person who says they can't hear me. If you could just use the little person at the top, the one to let me know that you can hear me and give me a green check that you can hear me, I'd appreciate it. Okay, see quite a few people can hear me. Oh, we got a hand raised. Do you want to type your question in the box? Oh, or did it go down? Okay, I can hear you. Okay, so if you cannot hear me, you may want to try logging in or out. I can go back and review the first page. You do need to go to the top of your screen and make sure you enable the your sound. And even if you can't get your sound working, this is being captioned, so you can read along with what we've got going on. So if you guys will clear your status. So today will be an overview of specially designed instruction and how the IEP team works together for a student who is deaf, hard of hearing to access the general education instruction. We will not be able to go in depth, but by the end of this training, you should be able to create a presentation for a variety of audiences on how the IEP team can support a student who is deaf and hard of hearing in the multi-tiered support system. Identify 3 resources to facilitate the IEP team in using the teaching cycle, curriculum, instruction, and assessment to drive instructional practices and service delivery for individual deaf and hard of hearing students. Write a SMART goal that addresses the needs of a student who is deaf and hard of hearing in the MTSS process. Definition of special education. By definition, special education eligibility is determined by a need for specially designed instruction, SDI. IDEA defines that term as follows. Specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible child under this part: the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction, to address the unique needs of the child that results from the child's disability, and to ensure access of the child to the general education curriculum so the child can meet the educational standards within the jurisdiction of the public agency that apply to all children. This is what makes a student have an IEP, is the specially designed instruction. Otherwise, the student would qualify for a 504.
This is a Dear Colleague letter from the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level. You can find the link in the pods to the right. RMTC would like to highlight 2 quotes from this letter. The first, on the left, says that research has demonstrated that children with disabilities who struggle in reading and mathematics can successfully learn grade-level content and make significant academic progress when appropriate instruction, services, and supports are provided. Conversely, low expectations can lead to children with disabilities receiving less challenging instruction that reflects below grade-level content standards, and thereby not learning what they need to succeed at the grade in which they are enrolled. Teachers must believe in their students and that they can achieve if provided interventions through specially designed instruction, accommodations, and support. We cannot be blasé and say, oh well, students who are deaf and hard of hearing statistically graduate at a 4th grade reading level. Have we tried adapting the content, the methodology, or the delivery of instruction? This means we are teaching differently than what the general education teacher and the gen ed students are receiving. And this also means that we are not necessarily following the pace of the gen ed teaching schedule. Last year, there was a Supreme Court ruling that ruled that de minimis progress is not equitable. In this Supreme Court ruling, the Douglas County School District was required to pay for Andrew F's private school tuition because his IEPs developed only afforded him the opportunity to make minimal growth, which implied he could or would not make progress similarly afforded to non-disabled peers. The cautionary tale here is that IEP teams have to ensure that they are not only meeting the needs of the student, but that they are providing an IEP with supports and instructional practices in place which will allow for a student to make annual progress, like their peers are expected to. This includes careful consideration of IEP annual goals, as well as the provision of specially designed instruction. So, what do IEP teams have to do? They must ensure that they have considered a free, appropriate public education, drafted annual goals aligned with the Florida Department of Education academic content standards for the grade level in which a child is enrolled, indicate the type, frequency, and duration of specially designed instruction. They may have to make sure that they've ensured access of the child to the general education curriculum in that least restrictive environment, and considered and addressed necessary support services, such as related services, supplementary aids and services, and supports for personnel. This does not mean copying grade level standards as the annual goal in an IEP. This is no different than what a regular education student would receive or be expected to do. If a student doesn't need specially designed instruction, then they should not have an IEP. They can be serviced with a 504 plan if they still need accommodations to access instruction.
Expanded skills standards were developed to guide the IEP team on how to provide specially designed instruction for students who are deaf and hard of hearing, to be able to access the general education instruction based upon the student's needs. They focus mostly on access, language, self-awareness, and self-determination. They do not specifically address reading and math, but once a student qualifies for an IEP, any area of deficit must be addressed. Also, a student needs to understand how they learn to ask their general education teacher to meet their learning needs during reading and math instruction in the general education classroom. The standards are written at the elementary, middle, and high school level. The purpose of speech and auditory training for deaf, hard of hearing is to enable students who are deaf and hard of hearing to develop speech and auditory skills necessary to achieve annual goals based on assessed needs and the student's individual education plan. The specially designed instruction activities should be age appropriate and include a variety of learning opportunities. Activities involving practical application may occur in the home, school, and community setting for the purpose of acquisition, practice, generalization, and maintenance of skills. Instruction of these skills pair well with language and reading instruction. The standards are written at elementary, middle, and high school level. Multi-tiered system of supports. The systematic use of multi-source assessment data to most efficiently allocate resources in order to improve learning for all students through integrated academic and behavioral supports. Tier 1 is core academic for all. Tier 2 is targeted instructional intervention. Tier 3 is intensive intervention based upon individual needs. A student who is deaf or hard of hearing can be in any of the tiers at any given time of instruction, whether they have an IEP or not. A student who is deaf or hard of hearing may be receiving Tier 1 instruction for one unit of math, but the next unit be receiving Tier 3 intervention. This can also be true for English language arts instruction. For example, a student may be at Tier 1 for main idea and author's purpose, but at Tier 3 for vocabulary and inferencing. They should always receive the same supports as their non-disabled peers first, and then receive specially designed instruction in addition to this support. If the general education teacher pulls a group for extra phonics decoding practice, like in the Foundations program, they should include the student who is deaf or hard of hearing in that group. Then, the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing can teach the student additional phonics instruction paired with visual phonics. The teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing would then teach the IEP team visual phonics to support the inclusion of the child in the Foundations program with the general ed peers. If this is a support necessary to alleviate a barrier to phonics instruction, the IEP team can consider adding it as a supplementary aid or service. Be careful to create a generic name for it. No trademark names are allowed in an IEP. For example, use the term visual supports for phonics instruction in lieu of indicating the use of visual phonics.
One of the components of specially designed instruction can be universal instruction. Universal instruction is the use of universal design for learning principles to act as a bridge for the gaps and reduce or eliminate barriers to engagement, representation of material, and student action and expression across all learning environments, which includes support for flexible, transformative, digital instructional materials. Based on universal design, we encounter on a daily basis. How many of you have ever seen a lever on a door or ramps at a business? We take this concept and apply it to education. Now, we're going to watch a video about universal design for learning. When we downloaded it to include it for this presentation, we were not able to download the captions, but the original on YouTube is captioned. CART will have to caption for us today.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal design for learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal design for learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1. Provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2. Provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3. Provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interests and autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways, allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.cast.org.
The video we just watched outlined the UDL guidelines. Universal design for learning is the process of looking at instructional strategies for every student in the class to ensure they are able to show what they know. It hinges on the understanding that offering students multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression affords all students in the classroom an opportunity to demonstrate understanding of concepts in a manner accessible to them. For example, take a child who has difficulty writing. If content understanding is the goal, i.e. a science standard is being evaluated, a teacher offering students multiple means of expression might assign a written response or a paragraph. But they could also allow for the student to perform a rap about the concept, act out the process, sing a song, create a digital presentation, or use text-to-speech software to complete that paragraph. All of these options would allow for demonstration of mastery of the concept or the content, but some of them are alleviating that barrier to instruction by allowing the student to participate more fully in the regular education classroom. It cannot be assumed that all teachers operate on the principles of universal design for learning. That is where teachers of the deaf must be able to speak to these components in order to create access to instruction. A caveat to that is that just because it's not allowable on statewide testing does not mean that it is not allowable in the classroom as an instructional strategy. Over in the pods to your right, you'll see links to a clickable in-depth analysis of the UDL guidelines. And I do believe that the link for the video is over there as well.
Accessible instructional material is the old name for this initiative, but because of the amount of time it takes for these initiatives to go through Florida legislation, it could not keep up with the national movement that changed it to AEM, Accessible Educational Material. So AIM and AEM are the same. This slide shows a quote from the Florida Technical Assistance paper, TAP, page 1 on AIM. Providing AIM is an inherent component of the provision of free and appropriate public education, FAPE, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004, IDEA for students with disabilities. Section 300.210B3 of Title 34 Code of Federal Regulations. The IEP team is responsible for determining if a student needs AIM, the format of such materials, and the necessary related accommodations the student may need to access standards-based instruction. AIM should be considered for all courses offered to students, including career and technical education, and all electives. According to a Dear Colleague letter issued on May 26, 2011 by the United States Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, schools at all levels must ensure equal access to educational benefits and opportunities afforded by the technology and equal treatment in the use of technology for all students, including students with disabilities. It is the responsibility of the district to make sure the use of AIM alleviates a barrier to instruction, not that it is utilized just in case. Also make sure that decisions to use AIM are not based on a label. Accommodations and/or SDI, specially designed instruction, are not label specific. Students with hearing loss are not all the same. Some students with hearing loss, thanks to technology, may do better with books and text read aloud by a computer. A student who can speak may still need an ASL dictionary. We cannot assume an accommodation because the student is deaf or hard of hearing. AIM and deaf and hard of hearing. For students with a sensory disability, e.g. vision or hearing, a teacher of the visually impaired or of students who are deaf and hard of hearing, learning resource specialists, assistive technology specialists, and medical professional may work together to provide the appropriate formats such as Braille, large print, audio captioning, video sign support, or other appropriate formats. In summary, the IEP team needs to work together to determine AIM for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing. A teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing is the expert on the hearing loss and should use the functional listening evaluation to determine how a student listens best. The local assistive technology specialist should work with the teacher of the deaf to determine what AT might be appropriate for the team to try with the student who is deaf and hard of hearing. The learning resource specialist at the school should let the teacher of the deaf know what curriculums are being used with the student at the school. If some of the curriculum is not accessible to the student, then they need to find a way to make it accessible, or purchase a completely different curriculum that is accessible for the student who is deaf or hard of hearing. And it needs to be ready at the same time that the general education students are going through the curriculum. The student must be also taught how to use the accessible instructional material. So I know that was a lot of different ideas and concepts, but how does it all fit together?
This training is based on the information from the TLC MTSS project. You can receive more in-depth training from them. This graphic represents the interdependence among core instruction, universal design for learning, and specially designed instruction at the various levels of need. Teachers can use this document to show IEP teams the way these components fit together for the best interest of the child being discussed. Keep in mind, a child can move up and down the pyramid based on need at any time for any subject. A student who is deaf or hard of hearing qualifies for an IEP because they require specially designed instruction. Otherwise, they might qualify for a 504 plan. All instructional materials at all levels of instruction must be accessible by all students at the same time they are provided to the students who are not needing accessible instructional materials.
This is a document from Colorado on how the expanded and auditory skills standards fit in a multi-tiered system of support. Notice the universal level interventions that should be implemented in every classroom for every student who is deaf or hard of hearing. This is the equivalent of Tier 1. Hearing identification, awareness of signs of hearing loss, hearing conservation, classroom acoustical considerations, multisensory reading techniques, good lighting, reduction of auditory and visual distractions. These are Tier 1 interventions, and they can benefit any classroom, whether the student with a hearing loss has a hearing loss or not. Many of these are UDL strategies. This is the Barometer of Influence from John Hattie's Visible Learning. Hattie found that the average effect size of all the interventions he studied was 0.40. Therefore, he decided to judge the success of influences relative to the hinge point in order to find an answer to the question, what works best in education? Hattie studied 6 areas that contribute to learning: the student, the home, the school, the curricula, the teacher, and teaching and learning approaches. The red means a student decreased in their learning. This can happen due to a traumatic event. Yellow is what a student can do because they lived another year of life and was not influenced by school. Orange is typical growth in a classroom for an average child who has no learning or home challenges, and the teacher just happens to be teaching to their style of learning, which for most is auditory learning. Blue is the zone of desired effect due to a teacher truly using evidence-based practices with fidelity. When a student receives services at the targeted Tier 2 or 3 of intervention in the MTSS process, the goal is that we need to accelerate the student's learning to close the achievement gap so the student can function within the universal core group. Ideally, the goal is for the student to function as an independent learner without secondary tier support. If a student is on grade level, they must maintain a year's worth of growth. If students are behind, then teachers must engage students in instructional strategies so students can achieve more than a year's worth of growth to close the gap. Hence, the zone of desired effects. Remember that Supreme Court case mentioned before. We can use this barometer to target strategies and/or interventions to use during our specially designed instruction. Fiddlers offers a book study on this topic, based upon the book, Hattie's newest book, Visible Learning for Literacy. It's highly recommended that you read this book and participate in a book study with your local Fiddlers group or school.
So, what do you think? On the slide, you will see often used strategies observed in schools. Take a minute and rank them in order of what you believe their effect sizes are, from most effective and highest effect sizes to least effective. Draw a line at the hinge point of effectiveness where you believe they cross over into the zone of desired effects. How close were you? If we rank these from highest effect size or greatest effect to lowest effect size, this is the result. So how did you do? As you can see in the slide, self-reported grades and student expectations had the highest effect sizes of the strategies listed on the previous slide. Actually, it had the highest effect size in all of the interventions Hattie investigated. The rest of the strategies listed above, the hinge point, have evidence of closing the achievement gap. Response to intervention, teacher credibility, if the students believe what the teacher says, teacher-student relationships, direct instruction, and exposure to reading are all within the zone of desired effects. The last strategy, exposure to reading, having an effect size within the zone of desired, The last strategy, exposure to reading, having an effect size within the zone of desired effects, supports research which indicates students will be better readers by increasing the quantity of what they are reading. Being exposed to reading improves a student's ability to read. Below the hinge point are homework and use of PowerPoint, which are still in the orange section of the barometer, meaning a teacher utilizing these strategies can expect results similar to being exposed to a year of teaching. Ability grouping with an effect size of 0.12 is in the yellow range of Hattie's barometer, meaning the effects of ability grouping are similar to the effects of what students would achieve without coming to school. Retention with an effect size of negative 0.13 actually decreases a student's achievement. These are certainly points to ponder when considering interventions for specially designed instruction for all students, but especially for our students who are deaf and hard of hearing.
We are familiar with the teaching cycle. The problem is sometimes we forget what the true purpose of assessment is. Assessment drives instruction. When a new student is placed on our caseload, we read the IEP to determine our goals and objectives for the specially designed instruction. We must choose a curriculum to teach the goals and objectives. The curriculum may be a published one like Steps to Success for expanded skills, phonics for reading for phonics, or rewards for decoding and vocabulary. Other times, the curriculum is a strategy, like pre-teaching vocabulary a story through a multi-sensory approach, like what is taught by Anita Archer's book, Explicit Instruction. You introduce the word, introduce the meaning, provide a student with a friendly definition, illustrate the word with verbal and visual examples, check the student's understanding, and then expand the vocabulary. Once the curriculum is picked, the teacher provides explicit instruction using UDL, AIM, and the student's chosen mode of communication. The student should be monitored through the lesson and be provided feedback throughout the lesson. Once the lesson is complete, the student is assessed. If they have mastered the objective or goal, then you must move to the next one. If not, then the lesson should be retaught in a different way. This is what progress monitoring is. If you assess and they are not making progress, change your intervention. Give appropriate feedback along the way. If they are making progress, keep going and increasing the goal.
You don't have to wait for the magical 6 weeks of intervention before you meet to consider changing a student's intervention for a particular concept. Once you have flatlined or see a downward slope, you can meet. Take a look at the graph in the slide. The yellow line is the student's target for the intervention. As you can see, student progress initially declined, but then proceeded to increase over a period of 4 entries. Then achievement slope significantly declined, almost flatlining. The red line indicates a change in the intervention, after which student progress began to increase again, continuing to close the achievement gap. Benchmark expectations can be seen at the blue, green, and black lines. You can see the student has met 2 of the 3 benchmarks already. What do you notice about the last 2 entries? What would you do if the current trend continues? If you said consider the intervention, you are correct. If the student continues to make flat progress or negative progress, the team should look to ensure that the intervention is being implemented with fidelity and/or if the intervention needs to be changed. The team should meet to consider changing the intervention or determining if it has been implemented. Albert Einstein said, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results."
Scientific reading research. This is from a principal's guide to intensive reading interventions for struggling readers in reading first schools. Interventions must be offered as soon as it is clear the student is lagging behind in the development of skills or knowledge critical to reading growth. Pays particular attention to number 2 because this one is based upon specially designed instruction. Significantly increase the intensity and instruction and practice, which is accomplished primarily by increasing instructional time or reducing the size of the instructional group, or doing both. Provide the opportunity for explicit, direct, and systematic instruction, and practice along the cumulative review to ensure mastery. It is a great summary for what we as teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing need to do. Understand, when we are trying to decide how much SDI to provide to a student who is deaf and hard of hearing, oftentimes this means more instruction. In addition, interventions must provide skillful instruction, including good error correction procedures, along with many opportunities for immediate positive feedback and reward. Be guided by and responsive to data on student progress. Be motivating, engaging, and supportive. A positive atmosphere is essential. The last Odyssey article from 2017, Measuring Success One Sight Syllable at a Time by Christopher Hayes, teacher of the deaf from Highlands County Public Schools, is a great example of applying scientific research to determine which specially designed instruction to use for a reading intervention with students who are deaf and hard of hearing. A student must be provided the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment is not the same for every child. It is also not the same for every student who is deaf or hard of hearing. Pulling a student out of general education classroom to provide specially designed instruction will not necessarily change a student's least restrictive environment. In theory, you can pull a student out every day and not change the separate education placement, which is reported to the state and monitored. The key is 80% with general education students. If a student is receiving an intervention with the general education peers as part of their MTSS in the classroom, these supports do not count as time away from general education peers. This document you see on this slide is just a small section from the Colorado Individual Performance Profile, which is a tool for the IEP team to use to discuss on how to provide specially designed instruction and related services above what the student is receiving already as a member of the general education environment. These discussions should be included on the communication plan, and final decisions should be integrated into the IEP. Some points to emphasize from this document which is based upon the MTSS model, are that 3 or 4 times as much instruction as the average student may be required in order to maintain normal progress in learning to read. Interventions may need to be guided by a different program than what the classroom core reading program is using. The way that reading skills and knowledge are taught should be consistent with the instruction provided in the classroom. Instruction in the classroom and intervention groups should be complementary and mutually reinforcing. Intervention teachers should meet regularly with the classroom teacher to discuss student progress. Someone at the school level must be responsible for ensuring that intervention programs are implemented regularly, every day if necessary, and with a high degree of fidelity. If there is not enough time during the regular school day to provide specially designed instruction, then it can be also addressed through extended school year. Extended school year does not have to only take place during the summer, and it is also not only due solely to regression. It can be utilized due to nature and severity of a student's disability, extenuating circumstances, or emerging skills. For more information on how to use extended school year to provide specially designed instruction, you can check the Florida Department of Education's tab on ESY.
So, how do I put all of this together in the IEP? The Developing Quality Individual Education Plans manual published by the Florida Department of Education has this listed on page 18. and it talks about the integration of ESE with MTSS. You can see it on the Florida Department of Education's website on the Quality IEP Manual. We start with determining what the student can and cannot do right at the moment, the present level statement. To determine a student's educational needs, the IEP team can follow the systematic 4-step problem-solving process embedded in Florida's implementation of the multi-tiered system of supports. The IEP team must determine how the student's disability affects involvement and progress in the general curriculum. The first 2 steps of the problem-solving process apply to the development of the present level statements. If you look on the slide, the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance and measurable annual goals. Step 1 is to determine what exactly is the problem. We have to define in objective and measurable terms the goals that need to be attained. We determine the discrepancy between what is expected and what is occurring. In other words, what is the achievement gap and what is the barrier to instruction? Step 2, why are the desired goals of the student not occurring? What are those barriers? So identify possible reasons why the desired goals are not being attained. Generate hypotheses or reasons why the student is not attaining these goals. Consider factors involving the student, curriculum, instruction, and learning environment. After step 2, we start to consider the special education and supports. Step 3, what are we going to do, is the determining factor for annual goals, which lead to the specially designed instruction. Progress monitoring of the annual goals are how the team tells if it's working. And then, of course, step 4 is to review if it is working or not. Look at the example of a present level statement for English language arts. For the purposes of this presentation, the present level statement has been limited to what we will use later to justify a specific specially designed instruction in supplementary aid and service. This statement is showing a need for SDI with visual supports are necessary for the student to close the achievement gap in the areas of ELA as evidenced by the 2-year discrepancy in phonics performance. So based on the results of a functional listening evaluation, there's your data. The student is able to orally repeat back 80% of phrases when presented with visual access to the speaker and classroom noise is present when he's more than 9 feet away from the teacher and when personal FM is utilized. His current iReady scores indicate he's reading more than 2 grade levels below his current grade, which is 3rd grade. His area of most weakness is in the area of phonics, showing a performance of more than 3 levels below same grade peers. Once the IEP team has targeted a specific barrier which needs alleviated, they can move on to writing SMART annual goals. Annual goals must also be differentiated from regular education standards. Again, merely copying a regular education standard and putting it into an IEP goal does not make it special education services. Annual goals have to be aligned with grade level standards. That does not mean that they are a copy of it. They must be written to show what the student will learn and be able to make progress in grade level standards. If you know a student is not performing on grade level, what can you teach them and a strategy to help them progress in the annual goal, which is measurable improvement? They must include the strategy or tools you will use. The goal must include the strategy or tools you will use to teach that annual goal. Annual goals have to demonstrate proof that there's a need for specially designed instruction. Otherwise, why does the student need that IEP? So a SMART goal is specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's results-oriented, and time-bound. For more information, you can click on the link for the Understood article listed in the slide. So this was the SMART goal drafted for the student based on the present level statement previously. Within 1 calendar year, while receiving small group instruction, including visual supports for phonics instruction, the student will decode up to 3-syllable words from context, utilizing learned visual supports with 80% accuracy in 8 out of 9 trials. Is the goal specific? Yes, it's targeting the area of most weakness from the present level statement. Is the goal measurable? Yes, an evaluator can determine if the student is able to decode 2 and then 3-syllable words by observation and taking a percentage correct of the decoded words using the strategy. Is the goal attainable? The student is currently reading at an overall first grade level, and 3-syllable words are within the scope of that grade level expectation. Is the goal results oriented? Yes, the student is expected to increase performance in the area of phonics. Is the goal time bound? Yes, the student is going to be expected to acquire these skills within the duration of the IEP. So we have established the need, set a goal. Now we look at specially designed instruction for this goal. Specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs that result from the student's ability or disability. This instruction should be designed to ensure the student can access the general education curriculum. Within the context of Florida's MTSS, specially designed instruction is categorized as a Tier 3 intensive intervention. However, it is important to clarify the following distinction. Specially designed instruction integrated within core instruction, supplemental intervention, and intensive intervention may look different for each student with a disability. Specially designed instruction is the unique set of supports provided to an individual student based on his or her learning needs to remove barriers that result from the student's disability. The supports are reflected in the student's IEP and are infused throughout the student's learning experiences and environments as described in the IEP. Related services may be necessary dependent on other components and needs in the IEP. The student from this example may need therapies if the team determined phonological deficits result in a need for a speech or language therapist support. Supplementary aids and services, most districts will discourage using the name of a copyrighted curricula within the IEP. The elephant in our room right now is that we all know that our annual goal was referencing using visual phonics, which is a copyrighted program. It can cause undue financial burden on a district to add a very specific curriculum, and it's hard to justify there is a need for that exact program. For example, if a student in your district is using visual phonics and moved into another district where no visual phonics is available, another curriculum can be used in its place if you haven't used the copyrighted term visual phonics. Kara shared before with me a program that she used, which was the Leapfrog Letter Factory, which has the visual hints for the phonemes. That technically could be a supplementary aid for supporting the annual goal and alleviating the barrier to instruction. So, on the IEP for our student, the specially designed instruction would be instruction in visual supports for phonics instruction, 20 minutes per day. Support facilitation for English language arts 4 to 5 times a week. This encourages us to not only provide that direct instruction, but to also have an inclusion teacher go in and provide support as well. The related services could be determined if they need the related services to benefit from special education. And under the area of supplementary aids and services, we would indicate use of supplemental aid targeting visual supports for phonics instruction. This way, it paints a clear picture of what the student needs in order to access instruction.
So throughout this training, we've referenced explicit instruction. And a way to get more training on explicit instruction is to take advantage of some of our Florida resources. The first one being Fiddlers. Fiddlers offers an outstanding training called Making Instruction Explicit for Students with Persistent Reading Difficulty. And there's a link in the pod there to the bottom right of where you can find out about that training in your local Fiddlers. If you don't want to go to an in-class training, the PDA portal has differentiating reading instruction, making it explicit that you can do on your own time. We also have the link for that. Also, your local fiddlers have 2 different book studies, Explicit Instruction by Anita Archer and Visible Learning for Literacy by John Hattie, that you can read the book and study all the different practices within the book. A good rule of thumb, though, is that if you're a less experienced teacher, the more structured and scripted the intervention program you use, the better. There are many prescribed interventions you can use. And again, your local fiddlers trains on many of these, such as phonics for reading, and in the past, they've also done some of the corrective reading programs. The more experienced you are, the better you can take any lesson and make it explicit. So at this time, we are going to take some questions. And if we can't answer all your questions now, or you have a very individual question, you can always go to this link and request a virtual meeting with us to answer your questions. So if you have any questions and you'd like to type them in the chat, Sherry and I will answer them. While you're waiting for those questions, again, if you want to download the actual PowerPoint or the links to the right, then you can use those. How successful do you find visual phonics? Again, it depends on the student. I've had some really great success using visual phonics with students, but then I've had some students it didn't work at all, and that's why we used finger spelling and other strategies. So it depends on the children. Before I actually knew about visual phonics, Sherry mentioned the Leapfrog for Learning Letter Factory. I used that program with many of my students, and it has all these like multi-sensory cues for the letters, so I used that. But I did transition afterwards to the visual phonics. The University of North Florida did a research on this and actually has some pre and post some assessments you can use to place them in the program, and post assessments and progress monitoring. If you want to contact Dr. Caroline Gardino at UNF on some of that research, and she used it with a program called 100 Easy Reading Lessons. And also the Clare Center has some posts on their website about how you can use visual phonics with programs like Foundations. But, you know, just like we know, just because you've met one deaf child doesn't mean you've met every deaf child. You know, not everyone can access phonics even with the visual phonics. So sometimes you may have to look at the finger spelling, and the CLAD out of the University of Georgia has been doing some of that research on using the finger spelling. And also, again, the Clare Center has some research on the finger spelling in lieu of using the visual phonics. Is there any other questions? We're always available to keep up with what's going on with RMTC. You can always follow us through Tech Notes, and you'll find out about the most current information on upcoming conferences, presentations, trainings, new technology, changes in the law, our website. All of this can be found in our newsletter. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Vimeo. You want to keep in touch with us that way. And like I said before, the survey links are in that bottom right pod. And I thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of your day today. We love hearing from you guys, and all of us are happy to help you in any way that we can. We are a B's discretionary project, and all of our services are provided free of charge. And one way that we can continue to do that is by collecting survey data to justify why our services are needed. So if you could, please complete this survey right now for us. It takes less than a minute. We would greatly appreciate it. And we will stay on if you still have some more questions.